and we're glad to be in the UK and the EU launching the tour. So this is a little bit really that the Harley-Davidson Museum came up with. They have a segment, it's called The Untold Stories, and they asked me to come to Milwaukee, and they put all their VIPs in an auditorium, and then I just told stories about my dad for 2 hours, and it worked really well, so we figured we'd do the same thing over here in the UK to start the tour off.
Right, well, let's talk first about Butte, Montana. What kind of a town was it when your father was born there, of course, and brought up there? What kind of a town was and is Butte, Montana, and how much did it contribute to kind of forging his character?
Well, my dad's grandparents moved to Butte, Montana in the 20s, and at the time Butte was really a wide open, rough, tough mining town. It was known as the richest hill on earth, and it was a town of immigrants. My dad's grandparents on his mom's side were straight off the boat from Ireland, and my dad's father they were German immigrants, and of course everybody came to make their fortune in the mining industry in Butte, Montana. Butte had a lot of character. It was people who worked hard, and luck and brains and skill and the way they worked actually played a big part in the development of who they were. So I don't know what that sign is doing there with the speed limit of 25 miles an hour. My dad never went 25 miles an hour in his life, but yeah, so that's the kind of town we grew up in. You know, it was a tough place and really developed some characters.
Wasn't your dad brought up by his grandparents?
Yeah, he was.
His early life.
Yeah, he was brought up by his grandparents.
Just tell us a bit about that. How come that happened?
Well, his real parents or his mother and father were divorced, and the grandparents raised the kids. I mean, just that's how it was back in those days. So my dad and his brother were raised by his grandparents.
I mean, I've read quite a bit about your father and about his early life in Butte, and it seems to, you know, the part of the world that I come from, the northwest of England, there are towns there, rough, tough towns like Leigh and Doncaster and places like that. And for a young guy who's not that academic, it's almost, there was a time when it was almost preordained that he would go down the mine, down the pit. So was that always going to be where your dad ended up, in the mines?
Well, he worked in the mines for a while. I mean, when he was real young, 18, I think he worked there for a couple months. He just didn't like it, so he was going to move on to something else.
Well, let's move on to the next.
This is a picture of my dad and his father on the right. His name was Robert also, and the woman on the left, her name was Ann Keogh. And her parents were Irish immigrants, and my dad's his parents were German immigrants.
Handsome couple.
Yeah, they look like they're handsome, don't they?
Absolutely. When would that have been?
That would have been in 1937, 38. What year was my dad born? 37, 38. Yeah, 1938.
So, what's the situation? What kind of a situation would they have had here? What kind of a home was your father born into? Were they a well-to-do family or just a regular hard-working family?
No, just a working-class family in Butte, Montana. And there's my dad's grandparents. That's my dad and his brother Nick. That's who raised my dad. And
did you know them? Did you know that?
Yes.
Yeah.
They were my great-grandparents. My dad's grandparent, the man on the right, his name was Ignatius, and he owned a car dealership that sold Porsches and Volkswagens. And I know where my dad gets it a little bit from, because my grandfather, when they first sold Volkswagens in the United States, he took the Volkswagen and he drove it up the courthouse steps in Butte, Montana, and got himself on the front page of the paper and arrested. So he had a little bit of promotional flair himself there.
Now I know about this one.
Yeah, this is my dad's early life here.
Yeah.
He was a hunting guide early in his life, and in Yellowstone Park in Montana, where we're from, the elk had a migration route that they took. So it was illegal to hunt the elk in the national park, but when they came out of the national park on their migratory route, then the hunters would line up and slaughter them, basically. So my dad owned a hunting guide business, and I think he did this more for publicity rather than anything else, but he got a big pair of elk horns and he hitchhiked to Washington, D.C., and he was demanded to see John F. Kennedy. So he could explain to John F. Kennedy, look, if you don't stop to slaughter these elk, your kids are going to look at elk like they look at a buffalo and a nickel someday.
You have to explain that to us, though. The other thing I'm surprised about, Kelly, is that you call them an elk rather than a moose, because the creature that we know as an elk is...
No, you're thinking of a red deer. This is an American elk. It's not a moose, it's an American elk.
Right.
Yeah.
And how old would your father have been when he hitchhiked to... how far would that have been for him to go from Butte to get to Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, I think he's 18 or 19 years old, and it was probably a 3,500-mile hitchhiking trip with a pair of elk antlers on your back. So, yeah, I mean, that was quite a thing for a young man to think, you know what, I'm going to go see the president, and I'm going to talk to the president about these damn elk getting slaughtered in Yellowstone Park. So, you know, you got to be pretty headstrong to have that sort of an idea about yourself and your own wherewithal to be able to do that.
Gives you some idea of the sort of the man he was to become, the fact that he was, at 18 years old, he thought he should go and knock on the door of the White House and say, you know, you need to pay attention to this 18-year-old kid from Butte, Montana.
Yep. So he didn't quite get in to see the president, but he saw the Secretary of the Interior, and they took him up on his recommendation and stopped it. Then my dad, he was an insurance salesman for a while. I mean, he didn't become evil. He wasn't as show Evel Knievel until he was 27 years old. So he went to work for this company. They were called Combined Insurance Company, and a guy owned it in Chicago by the name of W. Clement Stone, and he really was one of the first guys to start publishing things about positive thinking. So I think that's why my dad got along with him so good. But my dad broke the record for selling the most insurance policies ever in a month in the company. So then he wanted the company to make him vice president of the company.
Didn't he sell like 250 in a day or something like that?
Yeah, he sold a lot of policies. So the way he did it was the state mental hospital was like 20 miles from our hometown. So my dad went down to the asylum and he sold all the mental patients. He sold them all life insurance policies and broke the record for the most insurance policies that anyone had ever sold. And of course now they have laws where you can't go solicit people.
Oh, what a shame.
In mental institutions. So,
the strangest thing
but
is
he was pretty creative.
There are so many told stories concerning your dad, probably more than just about anyone else that's ever lived, but that is a true story, isn't it? Of all the stories about him that may have been embroidered over the years,
no, that is
the one
true
about
story.
him selling insurance policies to people in the asylum is actually a true story.
Yes, it is.
I mean, it seems he was a hunting guide. He was a miner. He was selling insurance policies. You really do get the sense, even at this early stage in this evening's proceedings, that he was looking for something, something more than you know that was on offer.
Well, he's done a lot more. He was in the Army when he was a young man too. It was during the Korean War, and his brother, my uncle, used to tell me the funniest stories. He'd steal the other officers' uniforms, and he'd run around and make everybody from the other states' barracks run around and do the oddest things. He'd have them out on marches at 3 in the morning, and he was just really a funny man.
So which branch of the services was your dad in?
He was just in the Army. It was just right after the Korean War, so he just went to basic training, and that was it. Then he owned a hockey team. He actually was the owner-manager of I mean, my dad was a hell of an athlete when he was young. He was the Northwest United States ski jumping champion, and he was a real good hockey player. He was a real good motorcycle rider. But what he did when he played hockey, and my grandmother used to tell me he spent most of the time in the penalty box more than anything, because that's what the people came to see. So what he did manage to do, though, is somehow he got a hold of at the time in the 60s, the players from Russia and Czechoslovakia were really the best hockey players in the world. So somehow my dad convinced the Czechoslovakian national team into coming to Butte, Montana and playing a hockey game against his team. So how he was able to, I mean, he's only 19 years old, and he would have had to call up a communist country behind the Iron Curtain, and somehow he communicated that to him, and he got the Czechoslovakian national team to come and play his team in Butte, Montana. And what he must have told them, who they were, I have no idea, but he got them to come and play it.
Is your dad
play a hockey game.
Is your father in this picture? Or
Yeah,
is-
he's number 18, right there in the background.
right.
Yeah, he's number 18 there.
Wow, he looks incredibly young in that picture. It almost seems like even now it's not one person. He'd already achieved so much, and we haven't even got up to his motorcycle career yet.
Yeah, he was working up to something, I'll tell you.
So what happened with the ice hockey? Did he quit voluntarily, or did it
He
just
ended
fold?
up playing semi-pro hockey in a couple games, and then it just, there wasn't enough money in it in Butte for him,
And so he moved on.
so he moved on, yep. He raced motorcycles. That's him, the number 51. You'll see he's got Butte and number 1 on his helmet there. That's him racing motorcycles in Ascot Park. And it's funny because I go through his notes, and he kept notes. For some reason, he had this idea that he was going to be somebody, and he wanted to preserve his posterity. So even back in these old days, I'll find little letters where he'll be writing a note to himself, and he'll say, well, I managed to beat everybody except for those guys in California. I could never win at Ascot. Or, he'd make little notes to himself about what he was doing. But he raced motorcycles for a while, too.
How old would your dad have been in that photo right there?
I would say 23 or 24, somewhere in that range.
Again, would have this been something that he did while he was working, or would he have been trying to earn a living as
No.
a pro motorcycle racer here?
No, he was trying to earn a living there.
And just, it must be very obvious to a North American audience what's going on here, but what kind of racing is this? Is this what you guys call long track, or is it short
Flat track racing.
It's flat
track
tracking.
racing, yeah. And it just depends on how long the tracks are. Sometimes they're a quarter mile around, they're an eighth mile long. Just depends on how big the tracks are.
But would it have been something where, I would have thought that would have been something where the guys would race locally. I mean, he was going all the way to California to race these bikes. He must have been racing at a fairly high standard.
Yeah, he was.
And what kind of bike, what is that there?
I don't know what kind of bike that is.
Is it Harley?
I
Who knows what kind of bike that is? Anyone?
Honda or Triumph, or I'm sure whatever they could get their hands on during the day.
So did he make a decision that he wasn't going to do this anymore, or was it again something that he tried and he was obviously good at it, but it just wasn't something? Did he have a family at this time?
No, I don't know what he thought there. I wasn't even born then. I don't know what he was thinking there. But then he opened a motorcycle shop. He opened a motorcycle shop in Centralia, Washington. And in order to get people into the shop, he would bet people anybody that could bend his arm down in an arm wrestling contest, he'd give him $100. And he never lost $100 one time. That was his trick to get people to come into the shop. And that's where he first jumped over. You read a story about how he jumped over a pen of rattlesnakes and mountain lions. That's where he first did it there. And it was really just a publicity stunt is all he did it for.
Didn't the snakes and the lions get a bit mixed up when he did that?
Now, I don't know if they did or not, but I know he jumped over those, and there was probably one rattlesnake and something that looked like a mountain lion in there. I'm not sure.
So why wasn't the motorcycle store in Butte? Could his your grand?
Oh, Butte was a small town. It's only
Right.
35,000 people in Butte.
So he was looking for a bigger market. What kind of bikes have we got? Was it Hondas or
I don't know what he
British
sold
bikes,
back
something
then.
like that? Looks
Yeah.
like Hondas.
Yeah, it looks like a Honda or a BSA emblem on that one, maybe. I don't know. I can't tell for sure.
Ah.
And here's where he conceived of Evel Knievel at. And I don't know how many people have heard the story about how Evel Knievel got his name, but he was in jail. Really, he was in jail, and he was in jail with another guy in Butte, and his name was Knoffel. So the jailer came in and just made a crack. He said, "Oh look, we got Awful Knoffel and Evel Knievel in the same jail cell." So that's how he got the name Evel Knievel, and he just changed the spelling of it to match his last name, but Knievel's his real name. So what my dad did now is he was inspired. There was a show, the Joey Chitwood show, where it was like a daredevil car show. It was nothing like this, but my dad saw it when he was a kid, and he says this is where he got his inspiration for his first daredevil show. And this is his actual first performance in Indio, California, where he had a daredevil show, and he did a number of things. He crashed through firewalls and did wheelies, and the midget there was part of the show, and my dad was the ringleader, so to speak, of all these men. So and then on the next slide, that's his first jump. That's in Indio, California. He jumped two 2 pickup trucks there, and that was in 1967. So his first performance as Evel Knievel was in 1967.
How did the ramp jumps are what he's most famous for, the kind of bursting through fire? There'd been all sorts of people doing that in the States in the 30s and the 40s between the wars, running the Hell Drivers and all the Daredevils. But do you know how your dad came up with the idea of motorcycle ramp jumping? He was obviously the first person to do it. That's a pretty radical thing to be doing at that time, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. I don't know how he came up with it. He was just born to separate himself from people, and whatever way he thought of to separate himself from people, that's how it manifested.
I'm wondering why he's left that gap in the middle, because you're saying he's jumping 2 trucks, but he could have put them closer together.
Well, that was his first time. They just said, okay, let's just put the ramps here and the trucks here, and we'll take off and see if we can make it. That was his first time he did it. Then the first time he was ever hurt, this was also part of the show. They used to run a motorcycle at him, and he'd jump up in the air and spread his legs, and the motorcycle would zoom out under him. So the first time he was ever hurt, this is really his first accident. He missed this, and the motorcycle hit him. He didn't break anything, but it spun him around. And he said, boy, he was one sore son of a gun after that incident happened. But that was really his first accident. He makes it in this one, but at a later date, his first time, he missed that one.
Where would he have been doing this kind of a show? Would it have been like state fairs and those sort of, or would it be something, he'd come into town like the circus, he'd set up the show, and he'd put posters up and go and sell tickets?
Well, when he first started, he was mostly on the West Coast, mostly in California. But he soon outgrew this Daredevil show. I think these guys only stayed together for maybe 6 months, and then either they weren't making enough money or my dad's personality was much larger than the show, and he left everybody behind, and then he just went on his own, jumping motorcycles. Here's my dad with his grandmother. This is his grandmother, my great-grandmother. This is actually who he was raised by. And the reason I put this picture in here is because he started out with these yellow leathers. This is how he started out.
Do we have any idea where that would be? That looks like
that's in Montana.
I was going to say that's Big Sky Country. That's Montana, surely.
Yeah. That looks like it's in Montana to jump in some surrounding town around Butte somewhere.
And there can't have been too many people that owned a set of yellow motorcycle leathers. You can see very early days this sense of showmanship, and this sense of setting himself apart from everybody else, so that he's the guy that get noticed, not just for what he was doing, but for the way he looked, because the way he looked was always a big part.
Yeah, that's a keen observation. Yeah, absolutely.
Did you know his grandmother, your great grandmother?
Oh yeah, very well. She lived to be 103.
Wow.
Oh yeah, she was a pistol, my grandmother.
I was going to say, what kind of character was she? A pistol. Right.
She was a pistol. Now, this is just to give you an idea of the way my dad thought. He never had any managers or no ad agencies, no publicists, no support team. Really, he did everything on his own. So he first conceived of, he decided he was going to be Evel Knievel Enterprises from Hollywood, California. So, and then he made up these names over here. So these are made up names. H. Carl Forbes and Carl Goldberg and Mike Rosenstein. He thought he'd sound very important if he had all Jewish managers and handlers. So he just made up the name, and the way he got to jump at Caesar's Palace is he called the owner of Caesar's Palace, guy's name was Jay Sarno, and he would say, "Hi, this is Frank Smith from Time Magazine, and I hear this guy, Awful Knaufel, is going to jump your fountains at Caesar's Palace." And Jay Sarno said, "I don't know what you're talking about." And then he would call back again from Life magazine. He'd make up another name, and he'd say, "I hear this guy, Evel Neville, is going to jump your fountains at Caesar's Palace." And they didn't know what he was talking about. And then he finally called back and said, "Hey, this is Evel Knievel. I want to jump over your fountains on a motorcycle." And owner of the place, "Where you been, kid? I've been hearing all about you all over town. When are you going to come to the fountain?" So that's how he bluffed his way into jumping those fountains at Caesar's Palace.
So when he subsequently became much better known and much better remunerated, did he then put these people in place, or did he always run it the way that he ran it back then? Did he run the whole show himself?
Yep, he ran the whole show himself. Like when he came over to jump at Wembley, I think they had 2,000 tickets. So he went and met with the promoters and fired them. And then 2 weeks later, he put 100,000 people in the stands. He just was really good at the way he did things.
Do you think that was that both a strength and a weakness, that he wanted to do absolutely everything himself?
No, that's who he was. I mean, he was difficult to deal with, and he was so far ahead of you when he was thinking. So it's probably better he did it that way anyway. And of course, this is a picture of the famous jump at Caesar's Palace. I didn't put the crash picture in here, I just put the jump picture in there. That piece of film was filmed by
Linda Gray.
No,
the famous piece, the infamous piece of film was
Linda
shot.
Evans.
Linda Evans, that's
Linda
right.
Evans and Bo Derek, or Linda Evans and John Derek, and they gave him the film, and it was his piece of, and really it's one of the most spectacular pieces of film that's ever been shot, is that crash at Caesar's Palace. So that's really what made my dad famous, was that crash at Caesar's Palace. It was shown all over the world, and he survived, and he was a brash young guy, and he got up after it happened.
How many people would have actually been there?
You know, I don't know. The kids weren't there. I know the whole parking lot at Caesar's Palace was full. But the objective of that jump really was, for Caesar's Palace, wasn't to sell tickets to the jump. It was to get some notoriety for their casino and get gamblers in there gambling. So
I mean, people talk about distance in jumps, but your dad knew that the distance was secondary to, you know, like you were saying, the first one with the snakes and the mountain lions. It was the situation, it was the location that made that jump, but it was a hell of a distance as well, wasn't it?
yeah, it was almost 150 feet, and the difficult part about this jump was he couldn't make any practice runs to actually gauge his speed to figure out how fast he needed to go. And he only came up about 3 feet short, so he just had to guess, basically, okay, I gotta go this fast. I mean, it was a guess. And he came up about 3 feet short, and it resulted in that spectacular crash.
And really, that's when things started to take off, not just in the States, but the idea of Evel Knievel as a name that went round the world.
Well, that got him pretty famous, but he still had to, I mean, you still have to create your own opportunity and then recognize your opportunity and be able to build on your opportunity. And this really gave him an opportunity to go on and do other spectacular things. The guy still had to get up from this and still had to go out and make something happen. This is my mother, and that's the helmet that he crashed in at Caesar's Palace, and she's obviously showing him all the crash marks in the hospital in Las Vegas there. So the way he married my mom is he kidnapped her. He put her in the car when he was 19 and she was 18, and she said, "We're going to go get married." She tried to get out. He had the doors all hooked up. And he drove her down the road 60 miles to a town and got married by the Justice of the Peace.
Is that allowed in Montana? Is that still legal? To kidnap women and marry them? Is that okay?
I don't think they knew any better, to tell you the truth, but that's how it happened.
So who's this?
This is my mom and dad. And what's so funny to me is that Rolls Royce there, we lived in a trailer in Butte, Montana. And I'll never forget the day my dad...
Is that the trailer behind the Rolls Royce?
No, I don't know where this photo's taken at. But I'll never forget the day my dad came home in Butte, Montana. It was snowing. It was the middle of winter, and he was so proud of himself. For first time he had a lot of money, and of course he wanted to go out and buy the most expensive. So he came home to Butte, Montana in a Rolls Royce, and there it is, and parked it right next to the trailer. I just think that's funny, yeah. And then my dad started getting famous. And there's his signature cane, and he changed his outfit. He went from yellow and black to red, white, and blue, and star-spangled. Made himself a deal with Harley Davidson, and started to act and carry himself like the major celebrity, really.
Was there somebody that inspired him in this? Did he look to sort of daredevils of the past, like Harry Houdini, who again was a fantastic showman who, like your father, he knew the value of picking an amazing location and really working the press before people knew about PR, really knew about PR, doing it himself. did your dad take from people like that, or what was the outfits and the showmanship, was that all his own doing?
That was all his own doing. There was one guy that he admired, the guy that used to walk on the tight ropes, Carl Wallenda. His whole family eventually died because they never used a safety net, and they all eventually fell off the tight ropes and died. But that's really the only other daredevil that he'd mentioned, because what they did was real. You know, what my dad did was real, and it was really dangerous. And no, I mean, I think he conceived of himself and thought of everything himself, and he made it all happen. And it's just a unique man in a unique time.
Well, he's got the suit there, and it's the image of him that we all instantly recognise. It's an instantly recognisable image and an instantly recognisable brand. Did he realise at the time that he was creating this brand, this iconic imagery that would be instantly recognisable and marketable all over the world?
I think he happened upon it by accident, and then as it happened, he was able to capitalize on that and then do it from a conscious point of view. Yeah.
I read somewhere that somebody said the cane was an affectation. They obviously didn't know too much about his career as a motorcycle devil. Did he actually need to walk with a cane by this point, or was it a little bit of showmanship going on there as well?
No, I mean, at Caesar's Palace, he crushed his pelvis and broke his hip, and his one leg was an inch shorter than the other leg, and yeah, he needed that cane to give himself a little support around, you know, especially when he was healing up.
Just to talk about the relationship with Harley, it's awkward in some ways, but at that time, why did your father feel that he wanted to hook up? Was it out of patriotism that he wanted to go with Harley? Because even at that time, there were far more suitable bikes, mainly from European and Japanese manufacturers, that your father could use. In fact, if he'd gone out of his way to pick a difficult motorcycle with which to do his stunts, he could have hardly picked a more difficult one than a Harley-Davidson motorcycle. Is a fantastic machine in many respects, unless you want to use it to do motorcycle ramp jumps. So was it the money, or was it, you know, as we can see there, was it his strong sense of patriotism that made him want to ally himself with Harley?
Well, I think it makes sense for both companies out there. I think it was the most intelligent business decision that he could have made. And I found the original contract that he signed with Harley-Davidson, and both his signatures on it and John Davidson's signatures on it. I mean, they were only paying him $7,500 a year, so I don't think it was a financial decision that he made, because he signed the date on the contract is 1972, I think. So I believe that he thought, and I believe that Harley-Davidson thought that this was the best way to market himself. And I don't think he was too concerned about whether the jump or whether the motorcycle was especially suited for actually making the jump or not. I mean, that was part of his show.
Who do you think got the best end of that deal?
I think Harley-Davidson got the best end of that deal, by far.
Yeah, because it wasn't a good time for them, really, wasn't it?
No.
I mean, you know, they've had some great times in the last couple of decades, but the early 70s wasn't a good time for Harley.
Yeah, and Evel Knievel made motorcycling popular again, and it set Harley-Davidson up for their success today, I believe.
Right, just tell us who's in this picture.
Well, my dad got so famous in the United States that basically he could go anywhere. He could almost do and go anywhere he wanted and do anything he wanted. And the reason I put this picture in here is that this is at the NASA Space Center, and we're sitting down with the astronauts there, and we're eating space food. And I think this is where he met Bob Truax, the guy that designed the rocket for his canyon jump. So I think he wanted to go to NASA. I don't know if he knew what he was even thinking when he was going there, but I think he wanted to go talk to him about a rocket that he could jump over the Grand Canyon with. So it's just, I mean, it's funny, you know, we'd call up and say, this is Evel Knievel, and they just roll out the red carpet for him, wherever he wanted to go, whoever he wanted to meet. I mean, really, everybody wanted to meet him. It was funny. It was like if you walked into a room full of celebrities, they all wanted to meet my dad. They all thought, wow, I got to meet Evel Knievel. So that's how he lived his life.
Which one's you on there?
I'm the one on the left, and Robbie's the one on the right.
Robbie, your brother
Robbie's the
Robbie
one on the right there, yeah.
Well, you've had dinner at the NASA and eaten space food. You've had it at the Ace Cafe. How do they compare? What was space food like?
Oh, hell, I don't even remember. It was just, it was just neat sitting around with astronauts. Yeah.
Cool.
So there's Robbie and I. We're on the edge of the Grand Canyon. Now, how my dad actually thought of jumping the Grand Canyon after Caesar's Palace. So he just had this horrific crash that almost killed him at Caesar's Palace. And then somehow he wakes up and decides, you know what, that's just nothing. I'm going to go jump a canyon. How a guy's mind can get from one, especially after almost killing himself, to the next thing he's going to jump is just, I mean, it's extraordinary to me. And the fact that he actually believed that he could do it, that he'd figure out some way to design some vehicle. I mean, if you look at this vehicle, he's got a couple propane tanks there on both sides of the wheel there and some fake wings on the motorcycle. And that's how he would promote himself to go jump the Grand Canyon. So then that's why I think he went to NASA, because he knew, well, that is just not going to work. And I need a true rocket designer.
What about all the stories about how the Native Americans, I don't know if you're allowed to say Indians anymore, but didn't your dad cut some sort of deal with the Native American people?
Okay, the only picture I'm missing in here, and I've looked for it because I've seen the picture before, and it's funnier than hell. He's sitting in the same spot there, and he's got these chiefs from the Indian tribe, and he's got them down on the ground, and they're looking at the motorcycle, like he's trying to convince them that, look, I'm going to fly over this canyon, and he's negotiating with them. So the Grand Canyon is a national park in the United States. So he was able to get permission from the government. It's just or from the Indians. It's just that he didn't get the permission from the government because it's a national park. So then he went and found the Snake River Canyon, which is the picture on the right, and that's our family. We're standing on the edge of the Snake River Canyon there.
Kelly, I'm just wondering if your dad ever worked out how far he would have had to jump, because the narrowest part of the Grand Canyon is not necessarily somewhere where he could jump. He'd need a fairly flat approach and a fairly flat landing on the other side. Did he ever go to
with
the
a
trouble?
Motorcycle?
Well, I'm saying, did he ever go to the actual trouble of
Steve,
working out how far it was, or was
no,
it
he didn't. He didn't think he was going to drive up a big long takeoff and launch himself over the Grand Canyon in a motorcycle. No, he always had a rocket in mind. But he was so good at promoting it that's how it manifested itself. It's just funny.
Where is Snake River Canyon?
Snake River Canyon is in Twin Falls, Idaho.
Wow.
Which is a neighboring state to Montana, right below Canada. But it's a mile wide and a mile deep. It's one big deep canyon.
And again, as soon as he announced that, the story started, and they've kind of been turned into legend over time, which was probably his intention all along. But did he? I read that he bought some land on either side of the canyon. So he bought the takeoff site and he bought the landing site.
Well, what he did was a farmer owned the land on the takeoff site, so he just negotiated to lease from the farmer the rights to use the takeoff site, and then the other side was owned by the government. And he said, well, I don't care what you do to me. Shoot me out of the sky if you don't like me. I'm landing on that side of the canyon. So he didn't really require that much permission to land, I don't think. He was more concerned about the takeoff side.
Even at this time, the big fights, Foreman, Ali, that sort of thing, Frazier, they were being marketed. The whole marketing thing had kicked in by then. I remember the local cinema where I lived in North Manchester showing pay-per-view Ali Frazier, Ali Foreman, that sort of thing. Did your dad have big plans for this? Did he realise that to control the rights, the image rights and the film rights and all that sort of thing, that could have made him a lot of money? Or was he just focused on making himself even bigger and more famous than he already was?
No, he was. He wanted to make a lot of money doing this, and the promoters he used for this. I don't know if you've heard of Top Rank Boxing, Bob Arum. He actually was the guy that did this closed circuit thing. So, Bob's a big boxing promoter, handles the biggest boxers in the world, and he actually did this closed circuit television. This is just a picture of my dad this is how famous my dad got to be. He's on the cover of Sports Illustrated, and he's on every magazine cover, and he's on Johnny Carson and all the late night shows, and he was just a phenomenon. And when I think about it, really in the space of, this is 1974. So in the space of 7 years, here's a man who was nothing in a small town in Butte, Montana. And really in the span of 7 years, he's probably one of the most famous people in the Western world.
That is some suit, isn't it?
For-
Who made the suits?
Who made the what?
I was going to say, that is some suit. Where did he
the
get
red,
the
white,
suits?
and blue suit. Well, he got it out of his own imagination. That is what is so astounding about the man, that he was able to do that with nobody but himself. That's just one hell of a feat in my mind. So, yeah, it was pretty neat.
It's interesting to me that he is on the cover of, rather obviously, Sports Illustrated. Did he see himself in that way? Did he see himself as an athlete, or was he a showman? I mean, to me, I look at that picture and, you know, apart from your dad, the obvious influence on it from me is Elvis. It's Elvis on a motorcycle. But did he think of himself as an athlete?
Yeah, he did. And you know what? There was a lot of other guys that tried to jump things on motorcycles, and not only did you have to be athletic, but you had to be a very physically tough person to be able to take those bad landings, and you know he was.
How old would your dad be there? 74?
38, 40, I don't know.
Yeah.
How old is he? 35 years old there? Right around there? Yeah.
So by this time he's got a family and he's got an entourage, yeah? Or did he keep it nice and tight? And I mean, did he have to keep doing bigger and bigger things to keep the whole show on the road?
Well, my dad was, you know, people ask me in interviews all the time, they say, you know, what was your family life like? What was your dad like? And you know what, he was Evel Knievel at the breakfast table. He was the same guy his entire life until the day he died. He truly was Evel Knievel. He was everything he did, he was the exact same person. And no, he never really had an entourage. I mean, he was out there living life and living life large, and you know, he's as human as the next guy, and he wants to go do things and explore things and see things he's never seen before, and that's exactly what he did, and that's exactly who he was. And he took along whoever wanted to come along for the ride, really.
Wow.
You know, this is funny. Now, this is the NASA engineer he met down in Houston, and they're building the rocket in the guy's garage in his backyard. So,
where's that? Where was it built?
Well, he didn't have as much money as the United States government to get the rocket built down in Houston, so Bob told him he could do it out of his garage. So this is how they started. This is how my dad thought he was going to jump the Snake River Canyon. So they fired off 2 test rockets, and both of them landed right in the middle of the canyon. First one landed in the middle of the canyon. They knew that one probably wouldn't make it, though. And the second one was supposed to go all the way over the canyon, but it had a malfunction at the parachute, and it went up in the air, and then the malfunction happened, and that rocket landed right in the middle of the river. So those were the 2 test firings.
So how was your dad financing all of this? Was he paying it out of his own pocket, or was he cutting deals with the promoters saying,
no,
when
he was
I
paying
do
it out of his own pocket.
And how much, do we have any idea of how much money would your dad have been earning by this time? How would the money that he brought in equate with a successful sportsman, a football player, a boxer, a rock star, something like that? Was he earning that kind of money by then?
Well, I know he spent money like a rock star. I don't know if he actually made money like a rock star, but you know, he could spend some money. He loved spending money.
But
to him, money life was a thing to be enjoyed, and that just required, some of it required a certain amount of money. That was his only concern with money.
But that early life that we talked about earlier in this conversation, where he moved from one thing to another, looking for something, he'd obviously acquired an ability to get people on board. He was obviously an immensely charismatic individual, and it seems that once he got an idea in his head, there were always lots and lots of people who were willing to go along with him, no matter how insane it seemed.
Yeah, he was a tremendous individual, able to command the attention of other people. But it was more about his belief in himself. He knew he was going to figure out a way to do it, and how it was unwavering. It's something I've never seen in a person before. You know, my dad did not dwell on his mistakes. If he made a mistake, he just immediately forgot about the mistake and figured out some way to move forward and sometimes do it better and not make the same mistake again. So that was, just had such a positive belief in himself, which I think is really important for parents to teach their kids. You know, here's a real example of a guy who just was unwavering in making sure he did things the best way that he knew how. Here he is. He's promoting the canyon jump here, and that's the crane company they used out there. And so they went on a big promotional tour for 6 months, and they'd stop in all the cities where they were going to sell the closed circuit TV tickets at. And he'd take out a fake check that someone wrote him for $6 million and claim that was his fee for jumping the canyon. And by the time everything was said and done, they really didn't make that much money on the deal. But made him more famous than ever. And he kept his word. You know, he used to say, look, what do you want me to do? Give them their money back? I told them I was going to jump the canyon, and now we've promoted the whole thing. And, you know, he kept his word and didn't know whether he would live or die, and had the crane lift him up and put him in the rocket, and he punched the button, and away he went.
I mean, as you said, Kelly, he had a guy from NASA, from the, you know, the space program involved in it, but how much of it was science and how much of it was bravado? What percentage would you, how much of this was calculated and how much of it was, like you've just said, get in and press the button?
Well, from my dad's point of view, I think he was probably hoping it was all science, because my dad had no desire to go down in the Snake River Canyon. But the exact same malfunction happened on the second test rocket. It happened on the third rocket exactly the same way. The only difference was the wind was blowing pretty hard that day. So he got up over the canyon, and on the second rocket, it went right in the middle of the river. And there was no way out of the rocket he would have drowned if the same thing would have happened. But on this day, the wind was blowing, and so it got up over the canyon, and then the wind blew him back into the wall of the canyon, like 10 feet away from the river. So it was just sheer luck that everything just worked out the way it did. And who knows, even if the parachute had not malfunctioned, who knows what the landing would have been like on the other side? I mean, no one knows what the landing would have been like. Who knows if he even would have survived that? So it just happened, you know. My dad used to say, you know, well, if I would have died, people would have said, oh, Evel Knievel died. Well, you know, he's a daredevil, and that's pass the potatoes. But, you know, he used to look up and say, but excuse me, I didn't die, and I'm still here. So, and really, it was by sheer luck. So then after the canyon jump, then my dad...
That's Sonny, but that's not Cher.
Yeah, that's Cher there. She's just got a wig on.
Is it?
Yeah.
Wow.
Then I think my dad was more famous than ever after that canyon jump. Then he really started to go on all the talk shows, and then he started his licensing deals with his toys. Really, and if you think about it, I mean, back in the 70s, he's well, we'll get to that when we get to the toy part, but it just got him more famous than ever. The canyon jump.
Ken was just as much a part of the image as the suits, wasn't it?
Yeah.
What about that story about the Ken? Did Liberace try to buy it from him, or was that just another of your dad's stories? Because if it is just another of his stories, he was really the king of that sort of thing, wasn't he? For just turning...
Well, that rabbit's foot, now, he tells me Elvis Presley didn't used to wear a rabbit's foot, so my dad, one of them got the other one wearing the rabbit's foot, and then one of them got the other one wearing their belt with their initials on it, and you know, that's just, he just got so famous that everybody wanted to be like, everybody wanted to meet him, everybody wanted to be like, I mean, really, and how does a guy from Butte, Montana, that all of a sudden acquires this fame by being this big, brash daredevil, and really think, I mean, think of how extraordinary that was for that man to handle that situation.
Did he enjoy this sort of thing?
He loved being Evel Knievel. I mean, that's who he was. And he had the expression, yeah, it's absolutely who he was, and he loved it, and he was good at it, and it opened up his life to all kinds of things.
But obviously, you know, there was a whole sort of Hollywood, LA, New York thing. Was your dad ever a part of that? You know, did you sort of come home and find Sammy Davis Jr. sat in the living room, or, you know, I don't know, Sonny Bono playing crazy golf with your dad out the back, or was it just not like that?
No, those things happen, but you know, my mom was really, my mom's a solid small town woman, and my dad my dad never forgot where he came from. And I mean, my mom and my sisters still live in Butte to this day, so but yes, we would come home, and yes, there would be celebrities at our house, but they were there for a golf tournament or something like that. And if, you know, I remember taking Flip Wilson's kids fishing on a creek, and we walked around a corner, and there's like an old prospector and his wife there, and they go, "Wow, we have Evel Knievel's son and Flip Wilson's son," and you know, we're out fishing in a creek in Montana. And
Kelly, who's Flip Wilson? We're British. We haven't got a clue who Flip Wilson is. You're going to have to go. Who was his... Did he have a real... I mean, obviously, people who are as famous as your dad were, they're going to meet each other. They're going to meet each other at charity events, like you said. They're going to play golf together. But did he have a real, true friend who was anything like as big as he was?
I'd say his best friends were from our hometown. I would say those were, you know, his real best friends. But in his heyday, he loved hanging out with Sammy Davis Jr. and Phyllis Diller. I mean, that was also part of who he was. He had such a breadth of personality that's very difficult to explain to people. I mean, he was able to be the big superstar of the world, and he was able to conceive and have the creativity and the ingenuity to make Evel Knievel into who he was. But at the same time, he was still from Butte, Montana, and he still had kids, and he could still be decent to people. I mean, he had a very large breadth of personality that he was able to span, and I think that's why he became so famous, because he was able to do all those things. And here he is with J.C. Agajanian.
That guy's the Ascot Speedway guy, isn't he? Yeah, the promoter.
J.C. Agajanian owned Ascot Speedway, and he owned all the garbage trucks in Los Angeles. He was one heck of a rich man. Wow. And he loved my dad. Him and my dad got along really good. J.C. Agajanian had a racing car at Indianapolis, and my dad would go to Indianapolis every year with him. And they were great friends. And one of my dad's first jump was actually at Ascot Park. And the way it happened was they couldn't figure out how they were going to pay my dad. So they figured out what the average attendance was, and then they made a deal. They said, okay, whatever is over the, however many people we get here that's over the average attendance, and we'll just split it together. So when the gate was there, J.C. Agajanian called my dad in and said, how many more people came? And you know, my dad said, oh, we're out counting now. And J.C. Agajanian said, I've already counted, Evel. And then he took the money out and he split it with him, and he shook his hand. They just had a handshake deal, and they said, you know what, your word's as good as gold with me. And my dad never, ever forgot that, and he was his friend for his whole life.
The ramps that we see him, I mean, would all of the equipment travel with your dad? Did your dad have like a traveling show, or would he often turn up and it was just there?
Well, if you see that truck in the background back there? No, when he first started, my dad would physically drive the truck from show to show. And I remember going with him a couple, and my dad was funny. I mean, he would play jokes on my brother. He had this real old truck, and if he shut the truck off, it'd backfire. So he'd tell my brother, watch out for the Indians, Robbie. The Indians are shooting at us. And he'd shut the truck off. I mean, he was a funny guy. But yeah, he used to drive it around himself, and then he'd unload it himself. And then we'd line up the ramps by he'd snap a chalk line. And then we'd go stand up on the ramp. And I mean, I have old films of him do it. It's funnier than hell. He's standing on the ramp. He's just looking at the other end. He goes, nah, move it over a little bit. I mean, that's about how sophisticated it was back in those days. So.
And of course, you've got the old the rebel flag there, the Confederate flag. Butte, Montana could barely be further away from the South and still be. It'd have to be in Alaska if it was any further away. So, what was the thing with the Confederate flag, the rebel flag?
It might have something to do with where he's jumping.
Ah,
he might be jumping somewhere in the South in that picture, but I'm not sure.
Was there a time when your man there, JC, is it Asagian? I'm not sure about the pronunciation there. Was there a time when he and your father realised that instead of your dad being kind of an entertainment at the car racing or the bike racing, your dad was the main attraction? It kind of...
Was there a time when my dad recognized that?
Well, I'm saying, what I'm trying to get at was, really, the idea of someone like your dad, a motorcycle daredevil, they would often be added to that kind of show, stock car racing, motorcycle racing, as a half-time entertainment. But by this time, surely, the majority of people turning up are turning up just to see your dad. They're not there for the races.
Well, I think in some instance, I agree with you. But what's so amazing about my dad is that his show was 10 minutes. I mean, it was 10 minutes. The man literally set attendance records, and his show was only 10 minutes. He would walk out, he would talk for 2 minutes, he'd get on, he'd do some wheelies, then he would do a few run-bys, and then he'd do a jump, and the whole thing lasted 10 minutes, and he'd put thousands of people in the stand to do that. So whatever kind of charisma that he had going and however he related to people was just unbelievable. And the other thing that you have to remember is that Evel Knievel, there was no platform that Evel Knievel had to climb. In other words, he wasn't going to break this soccer player's record, or he wasn't going to throw as many passes as this. He had to make his own mold. It's not like he could go out and just do something else that somebody else had already done. He had to physically had to think of some way that he could become famous and be really great at it and do it in a really creative way. And really, I think he just stumbled upon it, and then he just seized the opportunity from there and went on to become who he was. Then they started making movies about my dad.
So that's George Hamilton, isn't it? On the back there?
Yeah, that's my dad and George Hamilton on the back of it. That's the first movie they made about him, Evel Knievel. And, you know, our family got to meet a lot of movie stars, and everybody got to go to L.A. And you know, I'm sure that was a pretty neat time in my dad's life. I mean, he was at the height of his fame, and you know, they're making movies about him, and he's the toast of the town. He's the toast of the nation at this point.
So as I remember in the movie, George Hamilton, as your father, rode the motorcycle up the stairs to kidnap your mother.
Yeah.
But in real life, he put her in the back of a van and drove her off to get her married.
Yeah.
So where would that have been? Would that have been in Hollywood, Beverly Hills, that sort of thing?
Yeah, it looks like it's in California somewhere.
But he never did that, your father. He never sort of moved there and got a house in Beverly Hills with a kidney-shaped swimming pool and started drinking cocktails and all that sort of stuff. No?
That would have been far too boring for him.
Not for your dad.
Yeah. Not for my dad, yeah.
What did he think of that movie, the George Hamilton one? Did he think George Hamilton was any good, or was he a bit of a wuss in your dad's world?
No, my dad was very proud. I mean, you know, it has his name on it. He was very proud of the deal. Or they went to do that. Then they made the next movie, Viva Knievel, and the woman in the picture is Lauren Hutton. She was really the first supermodel. She was the predecessor to all the supermodels.
She got married to the Sex Pistols manager.
Did she?
Eventually, yeah. She married Malcolm McLaren.
Yeah, so she looks like she's having one hell of a time there, huh?
There is a motorcycle involved in this picture, isn't there, Kelly?
I think so, yeah.
So how did your dad take to acting? Like a natural, or?
Well, he only did a couple of things. He was in this movie, and then he was on The Bionic Woman a couple times, and
as himself.
As himself, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he didn't win an Academy Award, if that's what you mean.
Did he ever think that? I mean, so many. You know, we've talked about how your dad saw himself, and like you've said, he saw himself as an athlete, a sportsman, and so many sportsmen, particularly in American life. Thinking of, dare I say, O.J. Simpson. He's not the only one. Jim Brown. A lot of American sports stars would then go on to successful movie careers. Mm-hmm. Is that something that your dad had in mind for when he stopped jumping, or did he think he was just going to carry on being the motorcycle daredevil he'd been all his life?
I don't know. I think my dad poured so much energy into being Evel Knievel. I mean, the way that my dad thought, my dad truly was a daredevil and truly could have died at any time. So, and he spent money faster than he could get his hands on it, because that's the way he lived. And one thing that he always said, his friends would always say, Evel, you know what, you need to save a little money for when you get old. And you know, one thing my dad said, he said, listen, I'm a daredevil. I could die tomorrow. I could die on my next jump. And if you think that some guy's going to move into my house and sleep with my wife and spend my money and raise my kids, you got another thing coming. And that's the way he thought, because he really thought that I mean, I don't think he ever thought, hell, what am I going to do when I'm 70 years old? I think he was so caught in the moment and living life to its fullest in the moment that I don't think he ever really thought that he was, or maybe he thought, hell, I'll think of something else. I don't know. He might have thought, I'll just think of whatever I think of and it'll all work out somehow. That's probably how he thought.
Wow.
Yeah, this is my dad when he loved to play, he loved to dress, and he loved to get to take, he's probably got 10 carats of diamonds on his hand there, and yellow shoes, and oh yeah, he was loud. Yeah, he was loud, he loved to dress, he loved to be the center of attention, and he was good at it.
The thing is, I mean, that's a tough guy from Butte, Montana. So even if he is wearing dungarees with cartoon chickens on them, I can't imagine that there were too many people, especially when he's literally got a club in his hand. I can't imagine that there were too many people that were going to, find it too amusing.
Yeah, no.
I mean, that's a
the way he
showman,
liked it.
isn't it? That's just a guy.
Yeah.
That's a guy who can't turn it off.
Yeah.
It's like you just said, the guy can't turn it off.
Yeah.
Was that hard to live with for your mother and people that were around him?
Well, it's not something he did on purpose. I mean, it's not something it wasn't an act. It's who he was. There was no acting about it. He was not any different at home than he is in that picture right there, or given a speech during the time of his jump. He was the same man. So was he hard to keep up with all of his energy and wherewithal and thinking and all that kind of stuff? Hell yes, he was hard to keep up with. And he was a demanding man, and he was a very competitive person. I mean, everything he touched, he not only had to win and be the best at it, he had to dominate. And some of that crept into his personal relationships. And yeah, he was not the easiest man to live day to day with. Let me put it that way.
You've touched on it, and we're talking about golf. One of the hardest to believe stories concerns him and his golfing, but it basically comes down to what you were saying about when he opened the motorcycle dealership. He was always looking for the competitive edge. He couldn't do anything without making it competitive.
Yeah, I agree.
He would have the craziest bets. Like he said, he'd give someone $100 if they could beat him at arm wrestling.
Yeah.
And some of the craziest stories are around his golfing.
Yeah. I mean, the day before he jumped at Wimbledon, I know they were out trying to hit 5-irons over the Thames River, for crying out loud. They were having bets who could hit a golf ball the farthest over the Thames River out there. So he just, from the street, who knows where he gets his ideas. But, that helped him promote the event.
Didn't he eat his trousers because he lost a golf game?
No.
I read he ate his trousers.
No, that's just not true.
And then the other thing was, in that story, the addendum to that story is that the guy who he took on and where he ended up eating his trousers or didn't eat his trousers was a professional golfer. There was that fearlessness. Again, surely something should have told him that as a motorcycle daredevil, it was unlikely, to say the least, that he would be able to best a professional golfer. But doesn't that say a lot about him that he never stopped to think that? He just thought, I'm going to beat you. I don't care that you're a pro golfer.
No,
I'm going to beat you.
Well, he used to have I think that was more bravado because, I mean, he liked to hang out with the most important people in the world. And it's part of his bravado in making those bets was he goes, they never play for their own money. They're playing for someone else's money. I'll bet if they're playing for their own money, they can't hold up to the pressure, and then I'll beat the hell out of them. That's just the way he would think about it.
Was he any good at golf? His stance isn't too clever, I have to say.
No, he was pretty good at golf. He was just 4 or 5 handicap, and he'd never shot under par in his life. And the week before he jumped the canyon, he shot 1 under par at the golf course in our hometown. I know that pleased him very much.
Wow, that's some shirt.
Yeah, and he had diamond bracelets, and he's leaning on the Ferrari or some car there. When he was going at the height of his fame, he dressed the part, acted the part, looked the part, spent money like the part, and it was not an act. He loved his life. He loved being this big personality, and he was good at it. And it just kept getting bigger and bigger and better and better.
I think a lot of people, when they come from a small town like your dad and they make a huge success of themselves, they kind of alienate the people that put them where they are by sort of trying to be above themselves, moving to another part of the country, starting to dress like the middle classes, trying to act all fancy and posh. Your father just seemed to enjoy his fame and enjoy his wealth, but never forget that he was a guy from Butte, Montana.
Yeah, that is exactly accurate. That just hits the nail on the head. My dad was out to enjoy his life, not rub people's nose in his success. And yeah, that's an accurate statement.
Kelly, do you know where that shirt is now?
I have no idea, no.
I like it. Wow.
And this is an example of another side of my dad. I mean, we used to go hunting all the time when we were kids. And that guy that he's got a hold of his beard, I mean, this guy was a prospector from Butte, Montana that we would go hunting with, 10, 12 times a year. We would go out hunting with these guys. All these guys are from Butte. That's me. And
is that you in the white and green?
Yep, that's me in the white. That's a prospector from Butte. The guy on the left owned a bar. There's a dentist. These were, just all friends of ours from Butte. So my dad had the ability to, like the picture before, and then he also had the ability to do these types of things. So he was, and he liked doing all these things.
As you're talking, Kelly, I can't help but again make the connection with your dad and Elvis. Because, the people that Elvis was this incredibly, insanely famous guy like your dad who experienced great highs and lows, incredible wealth, notoriety, fame, whatever you want to call it. But in the same way that Elvis would always go back home and his closest friends, the Memphis Mafia, your dad's the same. Your dad could have been, he could have been partying with the elite in Hollywood, doing what the hell he liked, and yet instead he's, tugging Grizzly Adams' beard back in Butte, Montana.
Yeah, he had his share of high times. I mean, he loved the high life too, but, he never forgot his friends or who he was.
Wow.
Yeah, this is just another example. My dad so he went from the first picture to the second picture. Now here he is down in Miami, Florida, on his speedboat.
That's some speedboat as well. Do you remember that? Did you go on that boat?
Yeah. And he'd invite all his friends down there, and they'd drive around to all the bars in Miami, Florida. In Miami and Fort Lauderdale, they have waterways that go to all the bars. So he'd fly around, but he loved to see his name on everything. So he'd always paint Evel Knievel on everything, great big letters, where he could see it and he knew everybody else could see it. That was just his personality. So yeah, that's just another example of, okay, now here's another side of Evel Knievel.
Knowing the man your dad was, surely he must have got an idea at some point for some sort of speedboat related stunt.
No, there was lots of guys doing that.
Really?
Yeah.
Too many people doing that sort of thing.
Yeah, there's no need for him to do that now. So there's where that little speedboat ended up. Remember I told you that he always wanted bigger and better and different? Well, he started out with that little speedboat, then he went up to the next size boat, then he went to a yacht, then he finally went to this boat here, which is called the Fed ship. And the Fed ship had a helicopter on top of it. So that's where his mind would go. His mind would go to bigger and better and more and all that kind of stuff. And then that's where we lived in Butte, Montana. Oh, it looks like Great Britain in that picture there, doesn't it? And he had these made. That's a Santa Claus doing a wheelie on a motorcycle. And that was our Christmas decoration with all the elves out in front of our house.
When would that have been, Kelly?
Oh, that was probably in like 1975, 74, right in that era.
And he flew the helicopter, yes? Did he bother to get a license, or did he just get in it and...
No, he never flew the helicopter. Helicopter he had a pilot for. Fact is, that helicopter actually crashed in Montana. No one got hurt or killed, but the guy was used to flying around in Florida, and he came over a mountaintop, and there was a big downdraft and just sucked him right down into the trees, and he survived, though. And there's my dad. He had an office in Butte, and he had a big vault built in it. And there's all his friends from Butte. Those are all $1 bills, but my dad thought it was a funny promotional shot. So he's shoveling money out of his vault that he has in Butte, Montana. Then he started with airplanes. He started with a little airplane, and at one time we had 7 airplanes at one time. So he used to paint his name on the side of the airplane in real big letters so he could fly down one way and then he'd fly down next to it and he could see his name on the other side on his own plane. He thought he just got the biggest kick out of that. That was funny. Then here's his Learjet, and his pilot's name, you can see it says McCullum Aviation there. That was his pilot. He met the guy, he instantly liked the guy. His parents named him Whatcha. So his name was Whatcha McCullum. And he used to fly my dad around, and that was, they got along famously. And then he actually died in a plane crash not too long ago. But those are all of his friends from Butte. So he used to put them on the Learjet, and then they'd fly down and play golf in Miami or San Diego or La Costa somewhere. They'd have lunch, and they'd fly them all home. And the reason I put these photos in here is because my dad always had an anti-drug message for kids. In fact, is one of the things I have in the exhibit is really, it's a handwritten speech that he made about anti-narcotics. And the little boy on the right is in a burn unit. You know, my dad used to visit kids in burn units, and one thing he would always do, he was always, whenever we would go somewhere, it didn't happen all the time, but it happened often. Like, especially like a minority kid. A minority kid would come up, and somehow my dad would befriend him, and he'd take the kid out to dinner with us. Just anyone. And he was really good about that. And he was really, I don't know if he was doing it to teach us a lesson or to broaden our view, but he was really good about kids that didn't have the same advantages as we did. And here he is. Look at that outfit. Yeah, my dad loved to gamble. He would bet on anything. He bet one of my brother's friends one time $100 he couldn't eat a can of dog food. I mean, he would bet on anything, on marbles, on golf, on football games and soccer. He told me one time, he goes, "Kelly, I took India over Pakistan in a soccer game the other day." he didn't even
Probably
know.
cricket.
Or whatever they were playing.
Yeah, he probably even wasn't quite sure what sport it was. But
he didn't care. All he knew is he had $100 on India. That's all he knew.
Was he a good gambler? Was he a successful gambler, or was it, $100 isn't a lot. You know, this is a guy who owns a Learjet, who owned, like you said, who owned that incredible boat with the helicopter.
Well, that's all he had left at the time was $100. So.
Wow. But I ask you again, was he good? Did he generally win, or did he always lose?
I don't know any successful gamblers.
Right. And the successful bookies,
there's no successful gamblers I know.
Who is that? Is that Lee Trevino?
No, that is one of my dad's dear friends. His name is Jack Swank. He's since passed away, and Jack Swank really was a really great golfer, and Jack loved to gamble. So my dad and Jack would often team up and gamble against other people. Then I brought you this picture to show you the Knievel line to compare to the Windsor line.
Nice.
Yeah, my dad used to drink a drink called Wild Turkey all the time. So there was some bike club in California that wanted to make him the king of the turkeys. So he went down and had a couple of drinks with him, and they put this outfit on him, and he took a promotional shot for him. So I put that in there especially for the English people.
Nice. Whoa.
Well, this is really his toy deal. You know, his toys in the 70s, when he made his toys deal, his toys sold more, they sold more money than any other toy in the history of the toy business. And here he's in the offices of the toy company, and we're remaking this same toy by an English company now is remaking it called Paladone, and it's for sale in the UK. But the most of his income came off of the money he earned from those licensing deals with that toy, not from his jumps. He made the majority of his income from that toy. And I've seen a couple of the royalty reports of how the toy sold in Europe, and it by far sold the most in the UK. So, and that's part of the exhibit that we're doing too.
I had it, and
or all
there's
those
probably
documents.
many. The other one, in fact, I know how successful it was because I did a little bit of homework, but also because earlier this year I interviewed Gene Simmons from Kiss. I was talking to Gene about how Kiss in the rock world really pioneered what your dad was doing. And I didn't mention your dad, and we were talking about how Kiss got the whole merchandising thing and that incredibly strong image with the makeup and the black and white. And he was saying that they were a hard touring band, they toured all the time, but the majority of their income came from that. And he just said the only guy that was better at that than us was Evel Knievel.
Yep.
And I looked up the statistics and the Sky Cycle and all of the other stuff. I think it was the best-selling toy in North America for 5 years on the trot. That is a hell of an achievement.
Yeah, it was incredible.
Apart from the bike, what else was there? Was there a Sky Cycle toy? I know there was a car as well.
Oh yeah, there was a whole spin-off of toys from. I mean, they had them exploring in the Arctic.
Yeah,
with
the
a
Arctic
backpack.
Explorer.
Oh yeah, they had all. They made up more toys. I mean, they had Evel Knievel toothbrushes. Someone asked me that. Well, did you used to brush your teeth with an Evel Knievel toothbrush? No, the guy was my dad. I didn't need to use his toothbrush. It was just. So yeah, they had lunch boxes and just everything they could think of, bed sheets. I mean, really. He really started the licensing business. I mean, there wasn't anybody that had their name on things back then that was selling things. So,
never mind.
Open up a lot of doors.
I was going to say, never mind Steven Spielberg or Orson Welles. The guy who made the TV commercial for the cycle was amazing, because on the commercial it goes for about half a mile, completely upright. Mine used to go for about 3 yards, and they'd just go straight into the skirting boards. But how much of it do you own? Do you have a full set of it, or do you have nothing of the toys?
I don't have any of the toys.
And of course now it sells.
And there's a guy in the United States that actually supplements his income. He's called 7-Inch Daredevil, and the guy's just funnier than hell. He actually goes around the United States and he does these jumps with this wind-up toy, and the guy's hysterical. Yeah, he gets into character. You say, well, Evel, how you feeling today? He goes, Evel's in the green room. You know, and he'll have the little 7-inch guy up there. He's really funny. There we are. There's corporate Evel Knievel. I don't know whose boardroom that's in.
That's Vladimir Putin, the guy who recently bought the World Cup.
It looks like somebody had to Photoshop that picture, is what I'm thinking there. But then he's had requests to go over to Russia, and it's who knows? I don't know who sent him that picture.
He could have jumped Lenin's tomb. It would have been easier than the Grand Canyon.
Then the reason I put this picture in here is because this really is the price you had to pay for all this success. And his three most famous jumps really are Caesar's Palace, the Snake River Canyon, and Wembley. And he crashed all 3 times. So the price of all that success really is summed up in that picture. And you know, he used to say, you know, I'm a daredevil, and in my business, you got to be man enough to deal with the consequences of failure, and in my case I am. And I know I've always liked that picture. I thought that's just a really good picture.
I did want to ask you, I don't really want to dwell on it too much, but I did want to ask you how hard it was for you, the family, you and your brother and your sister and your mother, to live with the fact that your father was so often injured, or as you've said frequently this evening, lived a life where he could die any day. Or was it normal for you? Was it just the way life was for you?
I remember being nervous about my dad. I don't ever remember thinking that my dad could die today. I don't ever remember that. I mean, it was nerve-wracking when he jumped, but I don't think death ever entered. I mean, it just didn't ever enter our mind. He would crash, go to the hospital, heal up for a couple months, and he'd be back good as new.
Well, that was what I was going to ask you, but you kind of answered. How did he deal with it? Did he deal with the injuries? Did he train? Did he try and, you know, he was an athlete. Your dad was a great athlete, a ski jumping champion, a pro ice hockey player. At that time, were things like physiotherapy? Did he just lie there until he felt okay and then get up and go for a run, hit the gym? What did he do?
No, he never went for a run or went to the gym, but he would just, the way I remember it is he would just heal up on his own and hop back on his motorcycle, and that's how he did it. When he felt good enough to play golf, I think he figured he was ready to make a jump. And there he's taking the show on the road over to England there. So this is in our hometown of Butte, Montana, with the mountains in the background, and all that equipment. This is when he decided to go over to Wembley Stadium. so they had to take this picture, you know, because you got to list everything on your customs documents and all that kind of stuff. Though this is everything he took over to Wembley Stadium.
So what have we got there? We've got the...
You got the Sky Cycle.
I was going to say, is that the actual Sky Cycle?
That is the actual Sky Cycle, and that's the one that's up in Newcastle right now on the tour. And then you've got that wheelie car over there to the right. That was a dragster that does wheelies. That's also in the exhibition. That motorcycle with the red tank right there, I think that's the, or no, that isn't the Shark Tank motorcycle yet. That's, I think that's the one that's hanging in the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian's got one motorcycle and one set of leathers in there. Wow. The Smithsonian Institute in the United States, yeah. And he took that Cadillac over there. He used to drive that Cadillac all over London, I know, when he was over here. And I don't see the three-wheel jet bike, but it's in there somewhere.
Didn't he get the idea for the wheelie car when he was still a miner in Butte? There's a story about when he drove a truck at the mine.
Oh.
And that's how he got the idea for the years later. He thought, I know what I'll do. Are you going to tell the story or shall I?
You can tell the story. I've heard the story.
The story I heard was that when he worked at the mine, they had these trucks which, because they had to take so much of whatever went in the back, when they were unladen, they were really quick, really powerful vehicles. And your dad used to drive them round and slide them around the corners and all this, and he thought, I wonder if he could wheelie this truck. And he got them to put a huge boulder on the back of the truck, and then we'd drive round the yard with the front wheels 4 feet in the air, and he got caught and he got the sack.
I've heard that story. I don't know how accurate that story. I mean, that was when he was 18 years old. I don't think he was thinking of wheelies when he was 18. Here we are coming to London. And I put these pictures, I mean, just look at how large his personality is in that photo. Seriously, he's leading the crowd, he's leading the show. There he is driving around in the big red and white American uniform there. And, you know, when he landed, I told you they only had 2,000 tickets sold, and then he fired the promoters. And I mean, I've heard, I wasn't actually here, but from what everybody tells me, I mean, he basically just got in his Cadillac pickup, drove around London and exercised his personality, and somehow sold 100,000 tickets in 2 weeks. I don't know how he did it. But if you look at those pictures, you can see how he could have done it. So, I mean, he was a big presence over here. Oh, did I tell you about the press conference that he had?
Well, I was going to say, no, you didn't, but do tell us.
Yeah, he had he held his own press conference over here, and basically he told the people that if it wasn't for the Americans, that you'd all be driving German cars over here. And so that got him on the front page and got him a lot of attention. And then there was a very proper older English woman reporter that said, Mr. Knievel, I'd like to ask you about your failure at the Snake River Canyon. So my dad thought about it for a second. He said, you know, I've been over in your country for a couple weeks here, and I've driven around your country from one side of the other to the other side, and all I have to say is in your country I haven't seen a canyon or a woman I couldn't jump. So that got a lot of press for him over in England, and somehow he just built on it and put all the people in the stadium.
And here we are, Wembley Stadium, less than, half a mile from where we are right now?
Yeah, then of course everyone has seen this series of photographs, and I just show him starting to fall off the motorcycle, not his actual crash, but this jump just shows his character, because he really couldn't make a run at this either, you know, with a practice jump at this either. Because he had to come down the ski jump ramp because there wasn't enough room in the stadium. So once again, he just had to guess at how far he had to go. And you can see he lands just slightly short there, and just the force of the jolt just shook him off of the motorcycle. But after he crashed, you know, he crashed and he's laying on the ground and he's going into shock and his back's broke, and he decides he wants to stand up. You know, he said, you know what, I walked in here, I'm going to walk out. And then he made his announcement that he was going to retire, and then, you know, he must have came to his senses a couple days later, because then he decided he's not going to go out as a loser, he's going to go out as a winner, and he's going to go back to the United States and jump 14 buses. So, I mean, that really takes a hell of a guy to take that amount of shock and injury to
say, no, I'm going to do it better. I'm going to do it bigger, and I'm going to do it better, and I'm going to do it even more dangerous the next time around. So,
but look how many people are there. Wembley Stadium is absolutely packed to the rafters with people to see, as you say, something, the actual jump itself surely is over in not just a matter of minutes, but a matter of seconds. What kind of a show did they build around the jump, or did he just believe that he could literally just come out and, like you said, ride up and down, do a few wheelies, make a small speech, and then do the jump, and 100,000 people would turn up and pay to see that? Was there not like a marching band and cheerleaders?
No, there was nothing there. And have you all heard of the Houston Astrodome? It's where they play the football games in the United States. I mean, 3 nights in a row, he set the attendance records there. The place held like 48,000 people. And the first night he put 47,000 people in there. The next night it was 48,000 plus standing room. And the next night it was 48,000 plus standing room again. And he set the attendance records for that venue as well. But I mean, all he did, it was 3 nights in a row. And he just showed up for 10 minutes, made his jump. He made all 3 jumps successfully and put more people in each night, which is even more amazing. I don't know how he did that. He was just so famous and had just so much charisma that people just flocked to see him.
Did it annoy him at all that he's best known for the 3 jumps that you mentioned, for Caesars Palace, Snake River Canyon and Wembley Stadium? On all 3 of those jumps he crashed when he spent, what was his career like, 25 years as a professional motorcycle daredevil, and completed hundreds of successful jumps, but will always be best known for the 3 jumps that he didn't compete.
Yep. Yeah, 'cause, I mean, those are gut-wrenching crashes, and they're real, and that was part of what he did. What he did was real, and he was a real human being with real excesses and real failures, and somehow he could communicate that to people, and people related to that. And also part of that was real physical danger as well.
We can't come to the Ace Cafe and not ask you about the bikes. I mean, I noticed in those pictures where your father's pushing the motorcycle, he's got what we would call highway bars on the bike. I mean, by the time he does this jump, there are bikes available that are much lighter. I mean, I've got one at home. I've got a classic dirt bike at home that are much lighter, that have long travel suspension, better brakes, that would be much better suited. Was that a Bonneville, for a Triumph Bonneville that he used
for Caesar's Palace? He used it, yeah.
For Caesar's Palace, and by here it's the Harley, the XR. Was it the Harley, the XR 750?
Yeah, XR 750.
I mean, was there not at some point did somebody not say to your father, "Look, there are bikes that would perhaps be better suited to this," or was it all part of the showmanship that he would take a bike that looked like it was straight off the street? He didn't want to look like he was kind of using a dirt bike would have been cheating somehow. It would have been unmanly to use a motocross or a dirt bike.
That sounds like it was part of it, and he had a contract with Harley Davidson, and I mean that was part of the show. That's why other people could not imitate what he did, because it took real skill and real athleticism to hang on to a motorcycle of that type. There were a couple other jumpers in that day, and they were using the dirt bikes, and I mean they still couldn't match what he did.
So what happened in the aftermath of the Wembley jump? Did he stay here in England to be treated and recuperate, or did he want to get straight back to the States?
Oh no, his back was broke. He couldn't even be moved until his back had healed up enough to move. So
but
he was in the hospital, and we came over and we stayed for a while, and then we went back, and my mom stayed till he was able to recuperate enough to get him on the plane and get him back home.
Wow.
And this is the when he jumped over the tank of sharks in the Chicago amphitheater. Normally he comes down that ski jump ramp. In this instance, though, there wasn't any room in the landing area, so they had to build it up. So he was practicing there the day before, and the ramp was so steep that he would go up the ramp after he jumped, and the ramp was so steep that he would fall off the motorcycle and fall all the way back down the ramp. So the actual jump was supposed to be the next day, and he pulled everybody aside. He said, "Listen, I can't make this jump, and I don't want to make this jump when the place is full of a crowd, because I don't want to kill anybody. So get everybody out of there." He goes, "And film this right now, because it was a made-for-TV thing that they were doing." So, sure enough, he went back, made a run at it, made the jump, crashed, broke both his arms, but they got everything on film, and because it was a TV thing, they were able to show it on TV the next day like it was live. But
How many of these jumps were the products of his imagination, and how many were jumps that he was asked to do by other people?
oh, I think they were all products of his imagination. I think every one of them was.
Where did he get the sharks from?
Who knows? I don't know how you ski. I know he walked it. You see that landing ramp right there? That's like a safety ramp that goes out over the shark tank. And someone forgot to nail it down, I remember. So he was walking out on it to look at the sharks, and it kind of tipped like a teeter-totter.
Wouldn't it be the case that the sharks would be far more terrified than he was? I mean, all those people, all of that noise and a motorcycle thundering over them.
I don't even know what kind of shark. I don't think there was any great white sharks in there, but they were real sharks, and there was a lot of them. I remember seeing them.
At this point, is your father generates? I mean, again, it's an absolutely packed arena, tens of thousands of people. Was he generating most of his income from doing this, or by this time, was the brand of Evel Knievel what was generating the real money? Would your father have done something like this to keep the toys flying out the stores and keep all the merchandising going? Or was he putting, what we'd say here, bums on seats to pay the bills?
I don't think they had any kind of brand awareness, for lack of a better word, back in those days. They were. I mean, it really wasn't brand awareness. It was selling toys, is what they were doing. And at this point in his career, no. I mean, he had a large lifestyle, and it required a lot of money, and I mean, it kept getting larger, and it kept demanding more money to pay for it. So finally, he ran out of money, and the IRS leaned all of his toy incomes and stuff. So then he went through a little down period in his life.
I'm going to ask you a stupid question right now. I think I know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Was there a time when this was just going through the motions? Was there a time when he ever stopped enjoying the actual business of being Evel Knievel, and he was just doing it to pay the bills?
I would say that if he made all his jumps, it would have been a lot more enjoyable than it was. But I mean, he crashed a couple times at the end, and he would say, you know what, a professional's got to know when you've jumped far enough and it's time to stop. Okay, so this is, you can tell who the daredevil is in this film. Look at the look in my eyes over there. I'm over to the right of my dad. My eyes are wide open, so that's my brother on the motorcycle. And so what he tried to do really is he really tried to train us to take over the business.
Really?
Yeah, and Robbie took to it naturally. So now, I guess the reason I put this picture in here is, as my dad got older, it started to be Robbie's turn, and Robbie became the daredevil.
You never fancied it yourself? No?
No, I had scars on my hand and my arm and my knee, and I was all busted up by the time I was 15. So, no, none of that interested me. Or the crashing part didn't interest me.
If your dad is the most famous daredevil the world has ever seen, what do you grow up wanting to be? A chartered accountant, perhaps, or a...
No, it's kind of a hard shadow to step out of. It's just, it takes maturity and learning and education and experience. And, luckily my parents pushed, they always told us that it didn't matter what we were, just go be good at something, for crying. You're not going to follow in Evel Knievel's footsteps. So really, you just have to learn to feel comfortable with who you are and have it be okay. So then my dad started painting for a while. He made a deal with a guy to sell artwork. This was going to be his next career. He was going to become a famous painter. And that period of his life, he didn't sell too many paintings, and that period of his life lasted about 5 years. And really, at this point in my dad's life, he was just dead broke. He'd spent every nickel he made, and all of a sudden he realized he couldn't jump motorcycles forever, and he was dead broke, and so he turned to paintings to see if he could sell some paintings. And he didn't sell too many of them, but he sure enjoyed himself doing it, though, I'll tell you, like he did everything.
I think if we've learned anything tonight, it's, I'm not going to ask the question, because if this had been right at the beginning of our conversation, I'd say, what on earth possessed this guy to think he could make a living as an artist? But he obviously never had that doubt. He just thought, this is a good idea, I'm going to do it, and
Yeah.
didn't let anything get in his way.
Yep, and I can promote it and I can make it worthwhile. And he had the attitude he could do anything.
And presumably now, these paintings are way more popular than they were when he was doing them, and people collect them and pay.
I don't know who has I think he sold all of the originals to people. I don't really know who has the originals. And then as he got a little older in life, this is his second wife. Him and my mom were divorced when he was about 55, I guess. And then he met and married Crystal, and so they got married outside of Caesar's Palace. And you know, my dad rode a motorcycle out in a blue suit, and he rode over the fountains. And you know, there was 10,000 people watching the wedding. They shut the strip down, and it was a big crowd. It was really neat. Yeah. So this is my dad's second wife, Crystal. She spent the last 15 years of his life with him. And here he is I think that's in Butte. He's leading a parade in Butte there during Evel Knievel days. And then here, this is at the Extreme Sports Awards, where they recognize that Evel Knievel was the godfather, really, of extreme sports. And if you ask any of the guys in the extreme sport world, you know, like Matt Hoffman or Tony Hawk or any of those guys, they all give credit to Evel Knievel as their inspiration. So what Harley Davidson did, they came up with a great name. They called it Generation Evil. All the new guys doing all the stunts today and all their success, really, they owe it all to Evel Knievel. And it's who knows what the sport would have been, or if it even would have been this far. But you know, it always takes someone to start it and always get it going. And I think my dad's the guy that did that.
Was there a time when your dad didn't think he got the recognition he deserved? Was there a bad time there where he felt he was ignored? Because obviously by this time, you know, there was a whole new generation who kind of rediscovered you know, the Crusty Demons, Seth Enslow, those guys. They're obviously, the way they dress, their look, they obviously are fully aware of that your dad was the trailblazer, that your dad was the original. But was there a time when he felt that he was ignored and that he was, you know, he didn't get the credit he deserved?
No. I've never heard any leading athlete in the extreme sports business. You know, these guys really are athletic performers. I have never heard one guy speak ever that didn't give the credit to Evel Knievel. So, I mean, he never expressed it to me that he felt neglected. I mean, I think he knew. You know, you don't have to tell him something he knows. Yeah, I think he knew. And then this whole resurgence in interest in Evel, really, I think it's a form of respect for the type of person he was and the things that he was able to accomplish, and people's recognition really about how special he was. And that's Matthew McConaughey. He did a TV special on my dad, and it really revived his career again. You know, where he could make a decent living for himself, signing autographs and doing a few endorsements here and there, and I think it was a comfort to him in his older age.
Great picture.
Yeah, this is a really good picture of my dad. And that's the only reason I put it in here. So that's just a really good picture of my dad in his older age. And so once he got recognized, and he came back, and I mean, he looks like Evel Knievel there, and he was Evel Knievel from the day he was born till the day he died. That's exactly who he was. So he looks the same as he did. He still's got the same look on his face and twinkle in his eye as the day he was 27 years old.
Ow.
These are his two dogs. My dad had dogs his whole life, and these are the last two dogs he had. And their names were Rocket and Squirt. And they're two little Maltese puppies. It's just really funny to think of me. My dad's Evel Knievel was a big, tough, rugged guy, and God, he loved these dogs.
It's
so.
Always like that. I've met some of the toughest, most hardest guys I've ever met. Will frequently have these dogs that look like they should be owned by Paris Hilton. It's crazy. But I guess the thing is, of course, your dad was never the kind of guy who needed a big dog to bark for him. He did his own barking.
Yeah.
So he could have two, and nobody was going to say anything, were they?
No, he took those dogs everywhere. And then, you know, at the end of my dad's life, he died of pulmonary fibrosis. He had horrible pain in his back. He had a liver transplant. He had hepatitis C, and then he died of pulmonary fibrosis, where the little sacs in your lungs, they just gradually harden. So he realized when he was going to die, and that he only had a couple years left. And he said to me one time, he said, "You know, Kelly, all the things I've done in my life, I mean, really, I've lived as well as any king has ever lived, and all the things I've accomplished, and the fame and the money I've had, and I mean, he wasn't ever like a real religious person his whole life. He would say a prayer before he died because he believed in God, but I don't know what he believed about God. So what he said was, he says, it's just after all these things I've done in my life, what you just die and they just put you in a box and they turn you into, you just turn into dust. So he, you know, I'm not making any statement, any kind of judgment about religion or anything, but he did not want to believe that. So true to form, he went and found the most famous preacher in the United States he could find, which was Robert Schuller of the Crystal Cathedral. And then he went on his TV show, and for 1 hour, those two stood up there, and I'm telling you, if you want to see a show, you should have saw those two up there for an hour talking about God. I mean, it was one hell of a show, I got to tell you.
Well, there can't be too many people that have spent most of the time that they've had drawing breath on this planet nearer to the notion of their own mortality than your dad. So you wanted an insight on what that's like. He was the perfect guy for that.
Yeah, those are two old pros up there talking about God for an hour. And you know, after it was over, they have an altar call up there, you know, when people go up to the stage and accept Christ as their Savior. So after it was all, you know, the place was packed. It was on Easter, and my dad had to do it on the guy's TV show during Easter. And so after it was over, the people came up to him and they said, "You know what? The most people we've ever had on an altar call is like, you know, 3 or 4 people go up there." There was hundreds of people in line when my dad got done. It was like a half an hour wait for everybody. It was really funny. And we took my dad back home to Butte. We have a place here. It's a Butte Civic Center, and that's where we had the funeral. And the whole town was invited. We had a big fireworks show. It was really a neat funeral. You know, it was a religious ceremony, but it was in Evel Knievel style. It was really good. And then there's his gravestone. It says faith, health, education, work, love. And then the other side has explorer on it. And he had his gravestone made 2-3 years before he died. And he's buried in Butte, Montana, and it's right across the road from his grandparents there.
Great.
And
Again, that's
the
the
last
best
picture.
picture, isn't it? And that's
Yeah.
the best picture.
Yeah, that's a very iconic picture. I mean, he's a real rugged, good-looking individual guy with a, you know, with a #1 patch. And that's really how he lived his life. He lived his life to be #1 and think #1 and be positive and get up when he fell. And that's just a great way to end the story about him there. So I want to thank the Ace Cafe, and I'm really glad to be here. And the reason we're here, the exhibit we're going to have touring around. It's going to start in Newcastle, and of course you can find out all about it on www.evilknievel.com. Or best thing to do is go and see the exhibit, because you'll see just some one-of-a-kind items that aren't anywhere else, and there's some personal things in there. And we thank everybody for your support, and we're real happy to be here. Thank you.
Kelly Knievel. Now, I think we've used rather more of your time than we were supposed to. Is there any time available for you to take questions, or do you need to get to Newcastle? Can we take it?
Well, I can take a couple questions, before I go, if anybody has any. We'll just keep this short, 2 or 3 questions, and if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, go on.
Your dad's made a lot of famous quotes that have been used over the years. Which is your personal favourite?
My favorite quote? God, he's had so many funny things he says, and so many really witty and biting, sarcastic humor he had. I don't know. You know, I have his blood coursing through my veins, so it's.
What about the Muhammad Ali quote, where Muhammad Ali said to him, "You're the white Muhammad Ali," and he came straight back at him and said, "I think you'll find that you are the black evil Knievel."
I know he said a lot. He says all kinds of funny things. It's just you know, it depends on the situation. So I like that one, though. I'll go with that one.
Anyone else? Unique opportunity. Speak now or forever hold your peace. Well, I think most of what's been said this evening has been said. Once again, would you please thank Mr. Kelly Knievel for an amazing